Welcome everyone today to the Osher Virtual Lunch and Learn. This is our third virtual lunch and learn, and we're delighted to have everyone. I would like to introduce to you our Lunch and Learn volunteer coordinator, Sandy Clark, who will announce our speaker today and introduce her. Sandy?
Well, thank you, Jill. Very happy to have everyone here with us again today. Hope that everyone will enjoy it as much as we've enjoyed the first two talks we've had. Today, we'd like to welcome Salt Lake County Sheriff Rosie Rivera, who became the first female county sheriff when she was sworn in on August 15th of 2017. Sheriff Rivera brings over 25 years of law enforcement experience, having served as United Police Department's Deputy Chief, Chief of Police Services for Riverton City, Campus Security at Weber State College, and Taylorsville Police Department. The sheriff has directed her efforts into community, policy, and diversity within law enforcement. Sheriff Rivera believes in transparency and engaging with the community. Know the issues we are dealing with, and they become a part of our solutions. It's all about problem solving to keep everyone safe. And with that, I'd very much like to introduce Sheriff Rivera and let her take over.
Well, thank you, Sandy. And I appreciate the words that you just said about my bio. Since that bio was written, I've had a couple more years on. So been a sheriff since 2017. And, you know, it's a unique job that I have currently because I'm not only the sheriff over the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office, but I'm also the CEO over Unified Police Department. And it's a very, very unique situation where I oversee two separate organizations. I have about 2,000 employees. And we go from a range of doing corrections with our two jails. We run the largest jail in the state of Utah. And then we also have the court security, which is our public safety bureau on the sheriff's side that runs the largest courthouse in the state of Utah as well. And then to add to that is our law enforcement side, which is called the Unified Police Department. And with the Unified Police Department, that's where we do all of our law enforcement functions, such as patrol and detective work. I have been a police officer for 27 years. And, you know, I started out a little bit later in life. I went to the police academy at the age of 31. I had always wanted to be a police officer. Since I was about 7 years old is when I started talking about it to my father. And he always wanted me to be an attorney. For some reason in his mind, he thought that was the way to go. But I kept talking about it. And, you know, at a point in my life when I was a young teen, I got into a situation where my life changed a little bit, my life plan. So from the age of 7 to about 14, my plan was to finish school, become a police officer. That was my dream. And then at the age of 14, I got pregnant and I became a young teenage mom at the age of 15 years old. I continued to go to school for a short time, but back then in the 70s, they didn't have a teen mom group or educational plan where young teens could continue their education unless you went in person. And at the time, I wasn't old enough to drive, so I actually had to drop out of school. Later on, I did achieve to get my GED, and I joined the United States Navy Reserve, and I served with the Navy Reserve for a short time, and well, about 8 years total. But during that time, I was still working towards becoming a police officer, at the same time raising my family. When I turned 31, I spoke at the time with my husband, and we felt it was a good time for me to go to the police academy and continue with the dream that I did have. So I did go to the police academy, and I got hired right out of the academy at Weber State. It wasn't a university at the time, it was a college. So I became a Weber State College police officer. I worked there for 1 year, and Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office picked me up. And I came over to the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office and worked on the law enforcement side. And I've worked a variety of job assignments throughout my career, to include patrol, community policing, detectives, homicide, robbery, supervising multiple units, narcotics, gang unit. So I have a variety of education and experience in law enforcement. And then after 12 years working with the sheriff's office, Taylorsville City decided to form their own police department. So I went over to supervise their investigations unit. And it was a great experience. And when you start a police department, there's a lot of challenges. And I learned a lot trying to help with the planning and building a police department. And we did a very good job. However, one of the challenges that Taylorsville found was that the cost for policing is very expensive. And 7 years later, Taylorsville Police Department merged with the Unified Police Department. And Unified Police Department took them on in 2012. And so I became a Unified Police Department lieutenant, and I worked in Watch Command. And shortly after that, I was promoted to chief over the Riverton precinct. And I worked as a chief for Unified Police Department for a couple of years. And then I had this opportunity that opened up for me to run for sheriff. As many know, that the previous sheriff quit, and they needed a replacement. And the way that worked, he was a Democrat, so the Democratic Party had to choose someone to fill his shoes. And I had to run for office within the Democratic Party against, there were 6 of us that ran. And I was fortunate enough to win that election, and I became the Salt Lake County Sheriff. Becoming the first female sheriff in the state of Utah was a big deal, and also the fact that I'm a minority. I think that it was a little bit scary for me even thinking about running for office, especially as sheriff, because there had never been a female, or we had one minority sheriff at the time. So when I did win, I knew I was taking on a bigger role than just being the sheriff. And I had to run for re-election in 2018, and I won that election, and I've been sheriff since. I do plan to continue being sheriff for as long as I can. But the lessons that I learned from becoming a sheriff in the state of Utah have been huge. Number one, there's such a huge responsibility when it comes to the correction side of law enforcement that many people may not understand. When you're tasked with protecting and serving our communities, to include those who are incarcerated, it's a big task, because your role is to keep those folks safe in your facility. And so that was something that I had learned because I hadn't worked in the corrections area. It's really important to understand that our role in corrections, we don't make the decisions who come into our facility, but we do make the decisions on how you keep those folks safe. And then with our courts, a lot of people don't understand the significance of the courthouse and how many people go through court on a daily basis. And it's huge. Now with COVID, it's been impacted. A lot of things are being done online or put on hold. So we have had our challenges there. And then under Unified Police Department, as you know, with law enforcement, the law enforcement side has had a lot of challenges these last couple of years, specifically, you know, with COVID, we had an earthquake, we've had protests, we had civil unrest. There's a lot that has been happening on the law enforcement side. And we also have where people just don't want to be police officers anymore. So we also have a challenge with retaining people into the law enforcement side and also in our corrections side. So we've got quite a few challenges. I do want to talk a little bit about the organization. So the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office has been around about 160 years or more. The Unified Police Department has been around about 10 years. So prior to Unified Police Department, it was the Salt Lake County Sheriff who provided the law enforcement service for those entities. And then 10 years ago, it was reorganized and separated into two different departments. So that is the unique piece about the Salt Lake County Sheriff. The other sheriffs in the state of Utah don't run two separate organizations. So it's unique. It's a great challenge. And I think we do a great job at managing both. Some of the high profile things that we do within the law enforcement piece is we have a challenge when it comes to investigating critical incidences and investigating major events. And right now with COVID, that is our challenge, is how do you continue to serve our communities and protect and serve during a pandemic? So we have been working really hard in all areas, not just corrections in the courts and law enforcement, but with our communities to try to keep our communities safe, but at the same time, continue on a daily basis of our regular routine. So that has been a big challenge for us. And I think our future is going to be even more challenged because now we have where there is some civil unrest, there are some protests, and we're trying to manage all of that at the same time as managing our regular duties. So big challenges this coming year, this year that we're in. I think we're doing a good job at what we're, tasked with, but at the same time, there are many issues that we have to take a look at. Currently, we are looking at some police reform that I think is important, and we're part of the conversation. One of the challenges, though, is trying to get individuals who want to listen to each other and communicate, and that's something that I've been pushing since I've been sheriff, is we cannot accomplish the tasks that we want to move forward in any direction unless we're all communicating with each other and listening to each other. And that's a high priority for us, is to go out to our communities, listen to what our communities are telling us, and make those changes that the community is asking for. And really, we work for the communities. That's the difference between a sheriff and a police chief. A sheriff is elected by the people. I work for the people. I need to listen to the people. Police chiefs work for the mayors and the cities. So it's a little bit unique in the sense that the sheriff works for the people. And I love my job. I enjoy going out, talking to our communities, hearing from them. And I also enjoy making the changes that need to be made. And there are some areas that changes don't need to be made. And I'm happy to talk about those as well. But currently with law enforcement, it's been a challenge. I know that we can make, lots of changes and for the positive for our communities. And really what it comes down to is we're here to protect and serve. And that's just what we're going to be doing for the next, years to come. And we need to do that in a way that is fiscally responsible, morally responsible, and with integrity and compassion and empathy for everybody. And that's pretty much where we're at right now. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Okay, we have one question, Sheriff, from George. Are there any precincts in the county that need more law enforcement representation? And how do you fulfill the needs of smaller precincts?
So yes, we do have precincts who are down officers. And when I say down officers, I mean officers have either chose to retire recently because of the environment that being police officers, we're in right now. We've had a significant amount of people leaving the profession. So there are some precincts that are down, but what we do, Unified Police Department is such a large organization. We have over 360 officers. So when there is a vacancy, we are able to fill that vacancy with overtime. So the positions still get covered. And that right now is how we manage any type of vacancy or shortage in a specific precinct.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is, police scanners are public and available on apps, which can be a potential security problem. Do you feel they should be private?
Well, it is, that's a good question. I don't feel that they should be private. I understand that people want to hear what goes on. I do have some concerns, though. We have had people who listen to scanners and choose to go to the location that they hear something is going on, or they post it on social media, and sometimes that could cause danger to the officers. But at the same time, I think people have the right to listen if it's out in the public. We do have some channels that the public cannot listen to, and those are the channels that we go to for our safety. That's what those channels are there for, so we can communicate and not tip off someone. Say you're doing a search warrant and you don't want to tip off the individual that you were going to be arresting. We would go to those secure channels. So I'm okay with scanners. People have an interest in law enforcement, and we need to be transparent there.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what are some of the reforms you are working on?
Some of the reforms that we're working on are we're taking a look at our use of force cases. And right now with the Unified Police Department and the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office, we have put our use of force policies online. We have taken a look at how our use of forces are communicated and reviewed. We have actually added on to our website, and our websites are evolving as you go, and this is part of the reform and being transparent. We want to go out and show people what we are doing, and not make the community have to do a grandma request to ask us information. So what we've done is we've taken our training in the areas that are of public interest and put those on the website. Some of the reforms that we're looking at is the use of forces, but also what kind of training are officers getting? Do we need more training? And what we have identified is absolutely we do need more training. We need funding for that training, because officers are being asked to do jobs that typically should not fall under law enforcement, such as a mental health therapist. We get a lot of mental health calls. We need more training on how to deal with the mentally ill, people in crisis, people who are addicted to drugs, because we are the first responders. We are going to get those calls regardless. So we need to have more training there. And those are the reforms that we're looking at. We're also looking at, do we make discipline more transparent? How do you do that in a way that doesn't create more problems? Other areas of discipline are areas that we are taking a look at, as well as part of a police reform is every agency on the same page. How are they doing their discipline? How are they doing their training? Because the way it's set up right now, everybody does their own training. Everyone does their discipline differently. And I think we just need to bring everybody together, but still at the same time, give everybody their own independence as well.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what do you think the department does well?
I think, so we have with the two different departments, Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office, we are leading the way in corrections. We have the largest jail, and we are the role model to all the other jails of how we operate our jail, how we keep our folks safe in our jail, how we manage the large demographics that come through our jail. So we do that very well. Our corrections part of the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office, that is truly where I think that we are the proudest of the way that we operate our jails. On the UPD side, the Unified Police Department side, what we do best is what we call our shared services. So all the precincts that belong to the Unified Police Department pay into what's called a shared service. And those shared services are such as our SWAT teams, our Metro Gang Unit, our investigations teams. All of those is what we do very, very well. We are able to take, say, a major event. If we have a major homicide, we have very qualified detectives with a ton of experience that can go out and investigate those cases and get those cases solved and follow it through because of the quality of detectives that we have working for Unified Police Department. With a variety of area that we cover, we have the opportunity to get the on-the-job training for our investigators. So an example would be, if you live in Draper, the odds are there probably maybe one homicide in every 5-6 years. So your homicide detective would only get that type of experience investigating a homicide, every 6 years. They can go to training, but to gain that actual experience takes a long time. With the Unified Police Department, we cover so much area that is something that they get a lot of experience in, and they become the experts. And many of our detectives do testify in court as experts.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is, how have you instructed your officers regarding the Black Lives Matter peaceful protests?
Okay, you broke up just a little bit.
Okay, I'll say again. How have you instructed your officers regarding the Black Lives Matter peaceful protests?
Well, what we've done is peaceful protests are fine. It's violent protests that are not. So how we advise our officers is we always have a plan. We know in advance when there's going to be a protest, and we have explained to all of our officers, they all need to understand what the law is, and peaceful protests are within the law. And we meet with the person putting on the protest, whether it's Black Lives Matter or anyone else. We meet with them in advance, and we have a pre-meeting to explain, this is what our actions will be. This is what we are going to be doing. Now, without revealing all of our security and safety plans, it works really well. What we have found with these protests, the more communication you can do, the better. But we have ensured that our communities and our officers that protests are okay. What happens though is when the violence comes in, the message isn't being heard. And, you know, we have to make sure that the violence is not tolerated. And that is the fine line that we're trying to balance. So the best way to do it is to communicate with those who are putting on the protests, and everybody knows what will be accepted and what won't be.
Excellent. Thanks again. You've got a list of them here. The next one is, do you have a department that deals with fraud investigations?
We don't have a specific unit. What we have are in each precinct, they have a fraud detective, and the fraud detective in the precinct will take those calls and do those investigations. So they're spread out throughout the department. Years ago, we had just one unit doing that, but now we've spread it out to the precincts so they can work their individual communities and the issues that are going on in their individual community.
Okay, the next one is a little tougher. Why do officers have to fire 7 to 8 times at a suspect rather than just once or maybe twice?
Well, every situation is different. I can tell you when you're during our training, you are taught to take out whatever threat it is. So when you're taught that, sometimes if you shoot once, that takes care of it, then you typically would stop. If it doesn't, then you have to continue. That is part of the training with law enforcement. Now, during this, you know, conversation regarding reform and police officer shootings, every agency is taking a look at their training and what is being taught and what is under the law, falls under the law. Those are conversations that are continuing today. And I don't know whether there is going to be changes in that area, simply because you still have to be able to keep the public safe and at the same time keep the officers safe and the individuals who are involved. So lots of conversation around that topic is going on right now.
Okay, sounds good. Exactly who do you report to is the next question. Who do you report to?
Well, I report to the people. That I'm elected by the people. I don't report to a mayor or, you know, a group of people. Now, under the Unified Police Department, that piece of my job is a little bit more unique because I report to the governing board that governs the Unified Police Department. So they're technically a partner for me, but they do govern our policy and our budget. So I do answer to them. On the sheriff's side, you know, I'm an elected official and I answer to the public, to the people.
Okay, thank you. The next question fits into that perfectly. Some cities are dropping out of the Unified Police Department. Do you have any comments on that?
Sure. Yes, some cities have dropped out. So in the last couple of years, we lost Riverton and we lost Harriman cities. Those cities wanted to have their own local control. And I understand the local control, but I also feel like the cost for policing goes up when you have local control. Taylorsville has just recently said they were going to leave the Unified Police Department. And they said it was because local control. Some of the entities that were part of UPD have a problem with the sheriff being the CEO over the organization. And when we have asked them, what is the issue? The issue is the sheriff answers to the people, not to a specific group or person. So they want to choose their own chief of police that they can manage from their level. And that is one of the biggest issues that we've had with Unified Police Department, is the fact that the sheriff oversees the department, which in my personal opinion, you couldn't ask for a better deal. I have to answer to the people. What better way to manage? But you know, every entity has their own way they want to do things, and if they want local control, the only way to get the local control would be for them to leave the Unified Police Department or work with me as part of that governing board. And I think I have a great relationship with the governing board. They're elected officials from every entity or representatives from those entities. And I think in the last 3 years, we have made so many changes with the Unified Police Department. At some point, people are going to want to come back. And we have made our budget very transparent. When I first came into this job, our budget was not very clear, and it was confusing even to me as the CEO. We replaced our finance director, and we brought in somebody that had a lot of experience. And this individual was able to recreate our budget to be very transparent. We know where every penny is spent in the Unified Police Department. And anyone that wants to see that, we have been transparent and pushed that budget out. So to answer all the questions that individuals have regarding where is the money being spent. So I think in the last 3 years, we've made a lot of changes to the organization for the better.
Okay, thank you for that answer. The next one is, please discuss what challenges, if any, the nationwide police protests have created for you, and how have you responded?
Well, the challenges that we have had, and you know, we haven't had too many protests here in the Unified Police Department jurisdiction, but we have had most of them are directed in Salt Lake City. So when Salt Lake City has a big protest and they need police assistance, which happened in the first few protests, you know, we have to come up with our resources to send there to help. We have what's called a mutual aid agreement. So when a law enforcement agency needs help, we go. And it becomes a costly issue. It costs several $1,000s. And that is our challenge of, this is money that we didn't predict or put in our budget that we would need. And so when you respond to like the big protests, you know, and then you come back and you have to start paying all these people for their response, now you have a budget impact. That really is one of the bigger issues. And then the fact that every law enforcement agency that responds works differently, and the response will be different. So what the chiefs of police and the sheriffs have done is we all come together since the protests, and we've said we all have to be on the same page. It'll take one officer to do the wrong thing and set a group of protesters into a riot situation. That's what we don't want. So that's a huge challenge right now, of bringing all of the law enforcement together and have us all working on the same page to keep our community safe.
Okay, this question might have been answered by that one, or perhaps asked for more detail. Please describe community policing in Salt Lake County and examples. I think you mentioned some.
Okay, I didn't get the very last piece.
Mention some examples. I think you just mentioned some.
Right. Well, community policing is one of the things that Unified Police Department does very well, and so does the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office. So community policing to us is going out to our communities and finding out what the need in that specific community is. So with Unified, we have several different precincts, and the demographics are different. The social environments are different in every precinct, and the way we model our precincts is we have community policing officers that go to the community and address their specific concerns or issues, and they build a relationship with law enforcement. One thing that we also do is our Citizens Academy. We have a youth academy. We also have an honorary colonels system where we have people who belong to the honorary colonels. We have a citizens advisory board that is very large. And these are citizens who volunteer to help us communicate with our communities. That's part of our community policing. On the sheriff's side, we have a unique way of community policing because our population is a little bit different. They're incarcerated. And one thing we do is we brought in diverse officers, deputies, to work in our jail to help with the demographics of those who come into our jail. And we're better able to communicate with those individuals if you have a more diverse workforce. And with the sheriff's office, we have a 27% diverse workforce, which is very high for the state of Utah, and we're very proud of that. We're still working on that on the Unified Police Department, but I think we'll get there. That is part of community policing as well, is if you can communicate well with whatever community you're working with at the time.
That makes sense. Thank you. I'm not sure I understand this question. I believe it's how do or how will you adapt to open carry long gun at protests?
With Perry long gun?
Open carry.
Oh, open carry long guns. Well, we have adapted. So as you all know, it's the law. You can open carry in the state of Utah. One of the things that we have done with our officers is we make sure we are able to identify who's open carry, and we have a dialogue with those individuals to let them know that we know that they are open carrying. Now, it's not very difficult when they have a large rifle, but we do let them know that we know what the laws are, and they need to know what the laws are when it comes to open carry as well. And I think having that dialogue makes a big difference. It does create a little bit of a panic, though, at those events, but it is the law, and you can't say they can't carry, open carry, as law enforcement, that we can't do that. We have to follow the law as well, and we can't violate the rights of those individuals. But having that dialogue and having a clear understanding of what the law is and what the rules are seems to help. I know in some of the larger protests, it has become a big concern, and it is a concern to all of our communities when somebody shows up with a rifle. I was walking into a Walmart recently and somebody was carrying a rifle and a handgun, but the law is that they can do that, and there's not much that we can do about it. It still makes me be on guard and able to, I want to be able to respond in the event something were to go wrong. But it really is something that if individuals don't agree with the law, they have to get that law changed, because we just enforce the law.
Okay, thank you. The next question, is the Sheriff's Department discussing more alternatives to those that might not require incarceration, such as first-time minor offenses?
Yes, we have been discussing alternatives to incarceration for the last 3 years. And this is a unique time right now for corrections. because of COVID, we have been able to reduce the amount of people who are in our facility just so we can quarantine people if they do come down with COVID. And during that process of reducing our numbers of those who are incarcerated, we have found that there are other ways to still hold people accountable, but maybe put them on supervised release, pretrial release. Maybe there's a bed in a drug addiction center. So we're looking at all different alternatives, and one alternative we've been working on is we support Mayor Wilson's plan on the community receiving center, which is a plan for down the road, but that receiving center will stop the individuals from being brought to the jail by the law enforcement officers. What it will do is give the law enforcement officers an alternative to dropping individuals off at this receiving center so they can get the true help they need, whether it's drug addiction, alcohol addiction, mental health issues, whatever it may be. And then there are some conversations regarding bail reform as well. You know, there are individuals who are booked in jail that may not be able to afford bail. Well, there are alternatives to the bail that the discussions have been occurring since COVID. One of the biggest challenges we currently have in our facility is the majority of individuals that are housed in our jail now are felons. So with felonies, those are the individuals you cannot just let out into the public. Most are violent felons. So if individuals want to look at what demographics we have in our jail, or you know, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, they can go to the Salt Lake County website. We have the jail dashboard. It is updated daily, and it shows you who are truly in our jail right now. But with COVID, we've found more alternatives, and I think that is going to carry on even after COVID.
Thank you. Which cities and communities are served by the Unified Police?
We have Holiday City and Mill Creek City, Taylorsville City, Midvale City. We have several of the townships. So we have Immigration, Brighton, Kearns, Magna, Copperton. So quite a few entities.
Great, thank you. What is being done to provide officers with inherent bias training?
Well, under the Unified Police Department, we have been teaching officers implicit bias, but what we're finding now, because of the conversations we've been having around police reform, more training needs to happen. So we are revising our training plan to include even more, not just diversity training, implicit bias training, but de-escalation training, communication training, and the same with the sheriff's office. Now with the sheriff's office, a lot of the training comes from Salt Lake County, and Salt Lake County has had a very robust training involving, you know, implicit bias training and diversity training for a long time. So I think they're a little bit up on all of the training that needs to happen, but we're also looking to see what else that we can add to, you know, to train the officers. And it's not just about training them, it's also, in my opinion, our communities are diverse. Our law enforcement needs to be diverse as well. And we're taking a look at how you hire, who you select, who can qualify to be a police officer, and what is the challenge. Because in many agencies, it's tough to get diversity if they're not applying. So we're increasing our recruiting as well to recruit more diverse individuals to fit within our communities of diversity.
Thank you. The next two questions I particularly like. How do male officers respond to working for and reporting to a female?
All right. Well, so far they've responded very well. I can tell you being a female in law enforcement is a challenge. Many people have asked me, how is it to be a minority in law enforcement? But the challenge truly is being a female in a male-dominated field, especially in the state of Utah. So, you know, I have worked my way up the ranks, and I have 27 years of experience. So I think that when I became the sheriff, because I had the experience within the organizations that I now oversee, I had already earned that respect. And officers have been very open to having a female run the organization. I have not had any problems with anyone, you know, bringing up my gender as a leader. One issue though I did see early on was being at the table now, there's not very many women at the table, and trying to get your voice heard when you are at a table with all men is not the easiest thing. And sometimes you just have to make sure that your voice is being heard. And that was a lesson I learned early on of, you know, when I met with the police chiefs in the valley, is that I am equal to them. I am just as competent as they are, and my voice matters too. And I make sure that I have a voice and people are hearing it, because I don't only represent myself, I represent all the females in law enforcement. And I think it's important that we have a role there. As I've gone through my career, I have seen the benefit of having females in law enforcement and the benefit of males. And if you can work together, we would have a fantastic department. And with both agencies that I oversee, I have not had any problems of my gender being the leader.
Okay, so the next question follows that. How have you managed issues that undoubtedly arise from being a female in a significant leadership role within an agency that's primarily male? Are you saying you haven't had issues arise?
Well, I haven't, I guess I have had some issue arise, because when you think about, I'm the only female sheriff in the state of Utah. So when I met with the sheriff, Utah Sheriff's Association, and they're all male, I felt like, okay, I have a big challenge here. What do I do to fit in? And I'll tell you, I was really surprised, because these sheriffs treated me just like one of them from day one. They even told me, you have 28 big brothers now. So I was, they were very welcoming. On the police chiefs, it was a little bit different, not quite as welcoming. And I'm not sure whether that had to do with me being a female or an elected official or, you know, other issues. But that's the only challenge that I have seen, is what I felt might be a challenge. And what I found, it truly wasn't, as long as I stood up for what I believe in and I let my voice be heard. People have been very, very welcoming, and it hasn't been an issue. And that's what it shows me. There is room for females in law enforcement as leaders. And we just need to step up.
That's a wonderful answer. Thank you. So how do you get your voice heard?
Well, I speak up a lot.
Loudly or often?
I don't have a loud voice, but I will stand my ground, and I don't like when people will just try to dismiss me, because it has happened. I have been dismissed by a hand. I have been dismissed by being walked over. And, you know, early on, I sat back and watched. I no longer do that. I will interrupt if I have to, because it's important for me to be heard too. I matter, and you know, I want them to know that my opinion matters. And as long as everybody has that understanding, I think the communication is wide open, and that's how it's been. So I haven't had many challenges in that way in the last couple of years.
That's really good to hear. Thank you. In what way has being the sheriff been the most different from what you expected?
I think the most, probably the fact that I'm an elected official. Sometimes, you know, elected officials, you have to be politically correct all the time. And I forget that. And maybe I'm not the traditional politician because I am in law enforcement. I have been able to speak my mind, and I'm not always politically correct. So that is probably the one surprise to me was for the majority of the elected officials I've been around, typically they try to be politically correct, and that's my challenge I have of trying to be politically correct but say what I really want to say. And you know, it's working, so I'm not going to change anything I'm doing at the moment.
Great. You mentioned that police should not be expected to handle some situations. So do you have any social workers on staff to handle these situations?
Yes, under the Unified Police Department, we have a mental health unit. We have a sergeant and an officer who go out on mental health calls, but they also have a therapist that goes with them. And we've had a lot of success. We are trying to build that program to add more detectives. We currently have 12 secondary detectives. So within the precincts, we have detectives who are trained on responses, and then the supervisor that manages the unit, the sergeant, she interacts with all of those officers to ensure that they all have the proper training, and you know, they know what the response should be. And then the benefit is having that therapist for sure. I wish we could have more. Now, there are calls that the therapist typically wouldn't respond immediately if, you know, the individual has a firearm or is a threat to the community. You wouldn't send in a therapist, you would send in the officers first. But what we're finding, having that therapist there with the officers, we're able to handle the situation in a way where there's not a use of force or you know, police shooting, those kind of things. So it's very beneficial to our program.
Okay, I gotta go.
All right.
Thank you. Here's an interesting question. How much gang activity is there in Salt Lake City?
Well, you asked me in Salt Lake City, so that's not my jurisdiction, but I can answer it for Salt Lake County because the gangs kind of flow throughout the whole county. Lots of gang activity going on right now, especially with COVID. As you know, you can wear a mask and hide your identity very easily under that mask. So the gangs have increased, but we have a very robust Metro gang unit who work on intelligence and suppression of the gangs. Also, we have a very robust gang intervention program. So we have individuals that are advocates that go out to the schools and speak to the kids about gangs and why you shouldn't join a gang. We also work closely with the U.S. Marshal's Office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, in combating the gangs that are the most violent. And we've had several cases in the last 3 years where we've actually taken down the entire gang versus just 1 or 2 gang members. And, you know, we have to stay on top of it. That is always going to be something that we have to stay actively involved and continue our training in.
Okay, great. We have maybe time for one more question. So how about how much training do your enforcement officers receive in de-escalation techniques?
Well, in the de-escalation, it's changed because of the police reforms that we're working on. So it used to be that you would get maybe 4 hours, maybe 8 hours. We're increasing the amount of hours now on de-escalation. When I first started in law enforcement, we had what was called verbal judo, and it worked really well. And then we kind of went away from that and started training different techniques. So we're always working on that, but law enforcement is required to do 40 hours of training every year on in specific areas just to be post-certified. We add an additional training, so our officers receive at least 100 hours for the most part in different areas, and then we have elected trainings as well. So those hours have changed, and it varies year to year, but we are looking at 8 to 16 for this next coming training year.
Okay, maybe we have time to squeeze in one more before you have to go. This one follows that last one. Are there psychological tests that go into the recruitment and hiring process?
Well, there are some agencies do psychological testing when they hire. The 2 agencies that I oversee, we do not. And the reason being is more of a cost issue than anything. It is very costly to send individuals to be psychologically evaluated whether or not you would be good at law enforcement or not. Now, the option that we do have once they are hired, if we see any signs, we have that option to send them to an evaluation on their mental or physical conditions to see whether or not, that is something that we need to consider. So for hiring, my 2 agencies, we don't do it, but there are many law enforcement agencies out there that still do that.
Okay, great. That was a marathon. You got through 21 questions. Thank you so much for your excellent questions, everyone. And thank you so much, Sheriff, for taking time out of your very busy day to join us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. We'll see ya.
Pleasure to meet you on Zoom.
Too. Bye.
Bye-bye.